Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Educator to Educator webinar. Today, we're going to cover enhancing STEM instruction in your classroom using some tools, tips, and tricks from smart technologies. We're really excited to kick off this webinar series. This is our first one, so thank you so much for everyone on the line today from all around the world that registered for this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit just of housekeeping if you've never joined a GoToWebinar before. You're going to notice on the right side of your screen that there's a floating panel. That floating panel has a microphone on it, but because we have so many folks on the call with us today, it's actually going to stay muted throughout the call. If you'd like to ask a question, there is a question bubble down there in which you can go ahead and send in a question to myself or to our host of the webinar today. We'll try to keep our eye on those questions as much as we can for the sake of time and answer what we can. If we don't get to your question, I know our presenter today, Kim, is going to give her Twitter handle out to you folks. So feel free to take advantage of that and send her a message on Twitter or add her at a tweet, and she can try to answer those questions the best she can. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to today's webinar host, Kimberly Ball, one of our efficacy and implementation managers at SMART. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the webinar. We look to see you all on more of these in the future.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. I am excited to be here with you and talking about something I'm really passionate about. And that passion actually comes from I'm actually a former classroom teacher. I have been in education for 15 years. I've worked with curriculum K through 12th grade. So what I hope to talk to you about today is something that really can be scaled all the way down from our primary students all the way up to our high school and even as applications in college as well. And so that's just a little bit of background about me. This is my Twitter handle at GTTechGuru. If you would like to connect with me on Twitter and ask any follow-up questions, share any successes or ideas you have as we're going through this, I would love to hear from you and connect with you. This is a great way to just stay in contact and also increase my own personal learning network. I love to connect with teachers and learn from you. There's going to be a few times today that you'll have the opportunity to kind of take a peek as to what it looks like for your student to join some of these activities. So if you want to be ready for that on your phone or in a web browser, if you go to classlab.com and enter in this number right here, you'll be able to connect, and then when we get to one of those activities, you'll be kind of ready to go. So let's just say if this number will come back up again later, so if you don't get it right now, it's okay, it's not a big deal, but it's just if you would like to participate and kind of get a feel of what our students are going to feel like. So let's kind of jump in today with a little bit of today's agenda. Our purpose of today is to really look at how we can leverage technology and empower student exploration, diving into scientific concepts, real-world math problems and applications, engineering, and really working with things that have purpose for our students. Our process on how we're going to do this is we're going to discuss the power of combining STEM or STEAM with design thinking, which is basically a framework that helps us explore a real-world problem. And the way we're going to do that today is I'm actually going to walk you through a template that I've created that can be used, adapted, changed, completely modified, however, to fit your class needs and projects. So we're just going to kind of walk through that template and talk about how it could be implemented in a classroom. Our payoff at the end of today, I'm hoping that you have spark some new ideas for teaching STEM and empowering you guys as educators with a framework that you can use, adapt to fit your needs. We are hoping to also send you at the end of today, you'll get a follow-up email that will have all the materials that we talked about today and also a certificate for your time today for joining this webinar because we know that that's important as well. So without further ado, let's kind of jump right in. Right here, what we'd like to start with is a little bit of a mindset about how technology can enable exploration, not just dispense content. We are at a point in time where our kids have access to a lot of information, and getting that information is not necessarily the difficult part, but being able to explore and ask meaningful questions and do something with that curiosity is becoming much more important. We're so connected now in our world that we can leverage this technology to really connect to each other, connect ideas, connect classrooms, and really enable people that can possibly solve problems to people who have a problem that needs to be solved in connecting the two. And it's really not something that's just meant to be for our experts. It's really something that can be happening in the elementary, early classrooms, and really doing things with purpose. So I love George Couros' book, Innovator's Mindset, and I love how he talks about not simply engaging our students, but empowering our students. We know great teachers engage our students. Great teachers get them excited about the lessons they're doing, excited about the content they're going through. But what we're going to talk about today is really more of empowering students. And that's really giving them the knowledge and skills to pursue their questions, their interests, and really impact their own future in a more authentic way. And so what we're going to talk about is how do we design learning experiences that really create that empowering situation. So how can we set up our classrooms to do this? So let's kind of go back and think about what students often do. If we think of a typical math lesson or even a science lab experiment that the students are excited about and they're engaged in, they start by consuming some basic information that is necessary. They might watch a process. They walk through a certain series of steps. They verify things that are usually already proven to be true. Verify a process that works maybe in math, or verify a scientific experiment where the teacher knows what is going to happen at the end. The students might not know, but they're verifying a known scientific outcome often. And then at the end, we're asking them to recall that information, possibly even apply it, right? But if we also think about what innovators in the real world do, what scientists, engineers, mathematicians, technology innovators, what they're doing in the real world, they're creating new ideas. They're exploring new connections, exploring their own questions, they're exploring the unknown, and they're discovering new ideas through this exploration. And finally, they have to reason, what do they do with these ideas? Why does it matter? Is it important? Is it not important? Is it feasible? So what I'd like to talk to you today is about how to bridge this gap somewhat of what our students often do to what's being asked of engineers and scientists in the real world. How do we create these experiences in our classroom? And I do want to reference here that there is a TED Talk linked right here. This is where I got this information from, and I really think it's an interesting way of looking at the experiences we set up for students in our classroom. And so I strongly recommend, if you have time, to click on this and watch this TED Talk. He had some really great ideas about STEM in education. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is integrating STEM and the design thinking framework. And basically what that is doing is really establishing a purpose and problem solving to our STEM process. So let's kind of dive right in. We're not actually going to play this clip, but I just want to reference it. If we think back, Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem, right? This is a real life STEM example where, if you remember this section of the movie, it's where the air filters were failing and they didn't have the proper air filters on board, and they had to literally figure out how to fit a square peg into a round hole in order to save the astronaut's life. And this was a real world situation that happened. And this is where STEM and design thinking really can equal brave, novel, innovative ideas. And I think when we connect it to how this has had drastic impact, it can be really powerful in our classrooms. So before we dive into the template, I want to give you a view of what the 5-stage process is in design thinking, and you'll see how it marries very nicely with the STEM or STEAM process. We have these 5 steps, but notice that they are not just moving from the first to the last. They circle back, they come back and forth, they repeat. And that's because, as we know in real life, the scientific process, the mathematical processes, they don't always work the first time, right? So they have to learn how to go back, how to reassess, how to adapt and change. And that is a skill that is so important in today's world. And it really fosters that growth mindset. So as we go through the template that we're about to start, I would like to speak a little bit of an example to connect back to an example that has been done in a classroom. And this was a STEM challenge that was given to 3 different age groups. We had a primary or elementary school in England, a middle school in the United States, and a high school in Canada. And they did a collaborative STEM challenge. They actually used Smart Amp, which we're not going to be diving into today, but it aligns perfectly with the design thinking process in STEM. And so this was the challenge. 1.3 billion people don't have access to sustainable light. So how can we create a light source that will provide free access to clean light after dark in countries that don't have electricity? So this was the challenge that was presented to them. And of course, what it looked like in the elementary school and their contributing ideas looked very different in the high school. But I like this example because it shows that even our youngest students can have real impacts on our society and in our world, and that we can attach purpose to our science, math, technology, and engineering lessons. So without further ado, let's kind of talk about our first step. And before I get into that, Jeremy, is there anything that has come up yet?
No, Kim, I think you're good to keep going.
All right, great. So our first step in our design thinking is empathizing. And like I said, this is you'll see the colors on the slide change. This is the beginning of the template. And I've actually attached just a blank template right over here in the resources. So when you get this file, you will have a blank template that you can go through and adapt for your classroom. I really wanted you to have something you could take away and start to play with right away after today. So our first step in design thinking is to empathize. Before we can ask students to solve real-world problems, they have to connect. They have to understand why it's a problem and how it impacts daily life of whoever it is that they're connecting to. So this is where we go really beyond just doing science experiments and really doing them with purpose. So what's good ways to empathize? Of course, we can use images, we can use articles, news stories, but I've found just using YouTube can be a very powerful tool. And I love this watch and wonder. You know, let them watch. Don't give them a whole lot of prior information before. Let them watch and let them start to ask the questions. What problems do you see? How is this impacting daily life? How will this impact you in the future? And what questions do you have? If you are somebody who's possibly not familiar with how to insert YouTube videos into Smart Notebook, you can see that I have clicked on here a little kind of a cheat sheet of how to do it very quickly. So that'll be here for you in your template, so you don't have to remember all these steps right now. So that'll be here for you, and you can actually just go ahead. And so if you imagine, let's go back to our engineering brightness example. What I would do here is I would find a video that explains that problem, that talks about that lifestyle where when the sun goes down, that's it. The lights are out for those children. You know, they cannot continue to have family time. They can't work on homework. And what does that mean? What are the implications of not having light at the end of the day? You know, it's something that we take for granted in our society. And so really helping them connect and put themselves in that shoes. So I love this watch and wonder as our first step. So let's kind of go right in. And so after we've watched this, hopefully they've jotted down some ideas. I remember several of you hopefully have joined our class lab, and if you haven't, you can still join right here. So what I would like to do is, let's imagine for a moment, we'll imagine that we have watched this YouTube video and connected you to what it would be like to, at the end of the day, not have electricity or power in your dwelling, in your home dwelling. And so my questions to you is, I have 3 questions, and you're welcome to submit responses in any of the categories, just so you can kind of get a feel of what this would look like. Is, who does this impact? Who does not having electricity impact in their community? What fields are impacted by this problem in the country, for example, in Uganda, which is a country that our students were working with? You know, for political, environmental. And last, how could this impact people your age? So now if I was doing this with primary students, I would probably focus just on this how would this impact a child your age, and thinking about, you know, how many of you have a nightlight in your room, things like that. But my upper grades, I can see, I can have them really go and analyze this a little bit more in depth, possibly even do a little research to build empathy prior to coming to class. So you can see here I'm able to collect some of your ideas. I could even move things from one column to another, so that as we go through and discuss, and we can kind of even rank what seems to be the biggest problem here. And this was a huge one that our students actually focused on, this not being able to do homework. So I love Shout It Out. If you have never made a Shout It Out, it is one of my favorite tools in Smart Notebook, and really, and I'm not, you can make a Shout It Out activity in 5 clicks. It's very easy. There is a video linked right here on how to do it. I'm going to go ahead and pause this. Thank you for those, or end this. Thank you for those of you who contributed, so we could get a feel of what this looks like in the classroom. And
Kim,
so you could see how we could.
Oops, so
go
sorry,
ahead.
Kim. I'm going to pause you real quick.
No.
We have some folks ask, just who had missed the very start of the webinar, how would a student join this session? So if you wouldn't mind quickly showing them that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So what a student would do to join this activity is using any device, a Chromebook, a laptop, a cell phone, a iPad. They would go to classlab.com and they would enter in this number right here. And this is my teacher number that I got by having an account. So if I go up here to account and sign in, I can create an account here if I've never done that before. And you can just log in with your Google account or your Office 365 account, and it's going to assign you a teacher number, and you will this teacher number stays consistent. So I recommended teachers post it above your board, connect with so that they can get on it quickly. There is even, if you're using iPads, there is an app, Smart Class Lab app, and that they can just get to it with one click. So for our primary teachers, that's really important. And it will remember up to 5 teachers' numbers, so that's a nice little tool. And we're going to come back and do another activity, so if you're just now joining this one, we'll have another one that you can jump on and kind of see what that looks like. But I see a few more of you joined, so I will start it real quick just so you can see what it looks like on your end, because I did have some new people join right then. So you can kind of see how you have the different categories on your phone. When you type in, you then select what category you'd like to send it to. Good question, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and end that one here, just so you have a little preview. But again, if you're not familiar with how to make this Shout It Out activity, it lives up here with this little alien Android guy, and there's a quick short video right here. I think it's only 3 minutes long of how to make it. It's a very fast way to collect and organize student ideas and input, which is always more engaging for our students, right, when we're using their ideas. So after we've spent some time empathizing and really kind of understanding the problem for their point of view, we need to get into really defining the problem. And what this stage I find interesting is I think a lot of times our science experiments and our even our math lessons, we live in this space, right? And it's important that we have the knowledge, we follow steps, that we gather what's known about it. But in our design thinking process, this is where we really focus on a human-centered human-centered problem. And we collect as much known information that is possible. And sometimes that's even establishing our own normals and doing our own research. So the first thing we need to do is gather research information. You know, how many people don't have light in this country? What are some of the light sources they are using? What are the problems with those light sources? And we need to ask the students to organize, chart, and start to collect that information in a way that can be referenced and utilized. But what's the problem with this stage is when we just turn our kids loose on the internet, there's so much information out there. So one thing I've done is I've actually embedded an internet browser directly into my notebook file. And to do this, it's just a very simple 3 clicks right up here, insert, internet browser, and I can then go ahead and pin the URL down so that it will automatically come to this. And this is one website I like because I can find articles and I can sort it by my students' Lexile scores. So if I have readers that are struggling readers or maybe younger readers, I can sort down their content to give them things that they'll be able to read. And I really think that that's a powerful tool. The other thing I can do is I can attach resources that I want them to reference over here in the paperclip. And you can see right here there's the insert button, and I can insert my hyperlinks right now. So for example, in preparing this presentation, I definitely read several articles about combining STEM or STEAM and design thinking, and so I can share these resources with you. So when you get this notebook file, you will have access to all the resources that are linked over here. So for my students, if we were doing this together, I would say maybe this is something during rotations they're coming around today, they're researching. They would know to click on using the board, click on the paper clips, use these websites to gather your information as opposed to turning them loose in such an open space. It kind of help concentrate them in, and maybe you've filtered in some information to, especially our younger students, help them be more successful at this stage. And then that leads us to our next part, creating experiments and collecting data. So a lot of times, and if you notice, for those of you who were already in my class lab before, my number is still the same, and if you are just now joining and want to go to classlab.com and join us, you may also do this. You can join even after I start the activity. So what I would ask my students here is, when we're looking at the problem of not having electricity or light sources, and we're thinking about what matters, what information do we need? So what are some things we can measure? So for example, we could measure battery life, if that's a solution they're possibly using, how long it takes for a candle, an average candle, to burn all the way down. And maybe in order to measure this, they actually need to create some experiments to do this. And you're welcome to chime in some things if you have some ideas in connection to the light challenge and engineering brightness. You know, what things can we change if they're using flashlights? But access to batteries is a challenge, or candles. And then I think this question right down here is a really powerful one. What variables can we find relationships between? So when we think about like the cost, you know, how much, how long a battery burn, or how long a battery has life in it, to the cost of those batteries, and doing the math there that goes behind that. And so making connections between the variables that they're starting to test and gather. And I love this, hours of dark in a month. I mean, they don't think about this because we have electricity, but what time, at what points of the year does it actually get dark? And having them go through, but as opposed to just giving them a list of questions, here you let them establish the questions, and you can, as the teacher and facilitator, help just kind of prod and guide them in the right direction, as opposed to completely driving the experiment. So you can see here, as this would be something I would leave up. I would have open lab time where they can bring in materials from home. They could submit material lists to me where I could collect things, and let them kind of run their own experiments to define what research they're working from. Because then here we can zone in. You know, obviously we're not going to be able to create a whole electrical grid for a country, but what things could we change and have impact on? What ideas could we work with? And that helps them narrow in their focus before we get to the brainstorming stage. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. Thank you again for all of your participation. If you notice, if you were in my last one, when I started this activity, it just brought you automatically in. So it's a really powerful tool of keeping your students on task and with you, and not having to repeat those directions over and over again on how to get on. So as we leave our define stage, something to remember is that you have access to tons of math tools within Smart Notebook that are interactive. So when we talk about measuring angles or things that are affected, you know, these are interactive tools that can be laid on top of pictures. Creating graphs appear also in math. We have graph table. So I want to point those out because those can be tools that can be used with our students. But also there's a lot of power in letting them create their own way to document and gather the data, plot it on their own drawn graphs, and just giving them a blank space to do that. So before we leave our define stage, is there any questions that might have come up?
Yeah, there were, and I'll take one of them and then pass one your way. So the first question was from the student perspective. In order to participate in those kind of response or student response questions that Kim was sending out through Shouted Out, that's what we call that in lab, do the students have to have Notebook on their computers? So the answer to that's no. They'd log in on Class Lab on any device that's browser-based, just like you all were. So in order to participate, we want the student experience. to not have to require a local download onto their machine. Ideally, if you have a desktop or a laptop hooked up to, a smart board that you're running these activities on, then you can have students on iPads, Chromebooks, Windows or Android devices, or even a blend of all of them, and they can have that experience as they answer those shouted out questions. So great question. And just one quick side note before we get off today, we'll also show you all a preview of Smart Learning Suite Online, which augments that experience that you're playing with. The other question for you, Kim, I've got two. The first one is kind of where could a teacher find the interactive manipulatives that you just showed on that last page? Where would a teacher find that inside of Notebook?
Absolutely, great question. What I have actually done is I've created a shortcut. Now, Jeremy, help me out. Is this one I have added, or is it standard on everybody's toolbar?
That looks like one that you have added.
Okay, so let me go through and show you real quick how easy it is to kind of, if you notice, I probably have quite a few more things up here on my bar than maybe you do when you're in your Smart Notebook. And the way I've gotten those is this little wheel over here. I click on here, and these are all things I can add to my Smart Toolbar. And so you can see, let's see here, here's the measurement tools. They're all here. I can just get the protractor, but I like having the whole tool. So in order to add it, what I do is I hold it down and I just drag it up. And you'll notice it says, no, you can't put it there, but yes, you can put it here. And I can put it as a half button or a full button. And so I added that. The other one I've added is that internet browser. That's one I showed earlier. I showed you how to do it with insert internet browser, but you can also do it with one click right here using this one. There's a lot of great tools in here. Just a quick sidebar, I know a lot of us, we write on our smartboard as teachers, and then the next class comes in or we need to clear it quickly and we're found standing there erasing everything. I love this clear ink button and one button. It takes away all the pen that was written on the board, but leaves all the typed text and pictures. So just as a little sidebar, play around in here, look around. There's some great things to add. Notice there's a few different tabs of things you can add. So if you're teach math, you're probably going to be very interested in these math tools, equation writing, things like that. If you teach English, ALA, you're probably going to be more into the concept mapping, things of that sort. So you can customize this experience to be the buttons that you need. So I think that's a very helpful tip is going up here in that wheel and getting the tools that you need. So I've added those math tools and they're all right here and you just drag them in.
Perfect. And then one other question that we can quickly answer with this one, will these materials be sent out after the webinar? The answer is yes. We'll put together kind of an update with the recording of the webinar, and we'll try to include this file as well to those of you who registered and came today. Last one, is there, and I'll answer this one, Kim. So someone asked, like, all right, so if I've got, Notebook, does it cost for my students to use classlab.com? The way that Smart licenses our software is that if the teacher is part of the Smart Learning Suite subscription, so if your district or school is on the Smart Learning Suite subscription, your students take advantage of all the tools that the teacher has to offer. So if your school has an active Smart software license, then your students can go to classlab.com, take advantage of the interactions there. There's no additional cost to have your students use the functionality if the school or the teachers are on a software subscription. So great question, and with that, Kim, I'll hand it back over to you and we can keep rolling.
Those are great questions. And an answer also, we're going to send this file that has all the content that I'm walking you through, the why, STEM, and design thinking together. But I've also attached here just a clean copy of the template pages. So starting with the empathize and moving on down actually has the whole process on the first slide, and then moving on down so that you have a clean template and don't have to go through the work of doing it. Of course, once you download it, it is your copy, and you can make changes to make it, fit your grade level, whether it's primary or upper, or the project that you're doing. It's totally, your file at that point. And since it seems like we've had quite a few questions about a little bit about the lab, real quick, I'll show. Let me add a page. In order to create a shout out, when I said it is only a few clicks, I just want to show real quick how fast it is. So I click right here on my Smart Lab guy. And this is going to show you a whole bunch of different activities that you can do. Great place. These are all designed to get in and make activities in less than 5 minutes. Here's my shout it out. I click on this. Notice I can do random. This is one big space, or I can do categories, and this is where I was able to break down into the different columns. I can even have my students submit images. So if I'm working with a kindergarten group that has iPads, they can go around and take pictures of right angles or things like that and submit pictures back up to me. I can control how many responses a student can submit, and I can even show or hide names. When I click finish, that is all it is to make one, and it is ready to go. I can add text on top if I would like to put, how can we help if we're, brainstorming ideas. And so I can give them a little bit more information of what I want besides what's in this little short thing. So I just inserted text on over it. So go in here, play around again. There was a short tutorial on how to make that shout it out attached under our first empathize, our first shout it out. There's a video there. But since there seemed to be a lot of questions, I did want to take a moment to address it. Okay, so now, I lost my place here. Give me a moment. Here we go. Oh, the blank page, yes. Okay, so now we have empathized, we've connected, we've really, then we've dived in, we've defined the problem, we've identified the variables, we've done some research. At this point, the kids know, have a lot more information. They're becoming experts so that their ideas are relevant, that their ideas are actually impactful. So I think that's a really important step. And it's not as simple as just defining the problem or identifying it. They need to get in there and play with it and manipulate it and really work with it so that they can understand it kind of from all sides. So this is not a process that I would recommend that you try to accomplish in just one day. This is a multi-day. For some, it could be a month-long process. It could be an ongoing project. I've seen schools do it as a club after school. So there's a lot of different ways to get into this, but it can also just be aligned with the content that you're doing, that you've connected with, and that you're asking them to show the content that you're going over in your curriculum and make it evident that they understand it through this process. So there's a lot of different ways to attach it. So here we are in Ideate. So the point of this section is to brainstorm, brainstorm, brainstorm as many ideas as possible. This is not about finding which ideas are feasible, which ideas are practical. This is about no idea is a wrong idea. The more ideas, the better. Because even the most outrageous idea, there could be a little piece of something that is the turning point, that is the main idea of something that actually does work. So I'd like to give my kids a little help with this. My guiding question, how might we, and we need to connect back to our defined problem, how might we provide a light source for a child in Uganda to do homework after the sun goes down? Something very concrete for them to understand. And then at the end of this, if we design this, what would we consider a success? I think that question is very important at the beginning. Because again, we're not going to create an electrical grid. We're not going to be able to provide lights realistically for an entire country, right? But so what do we consider a success? Is it a light that battery powers, sorry, not battery powered, a light that functions for 30 minutes or more? Giving them to kind of establish what they consider the ultimate success, I think is important at this point. So one thing I've incorporated here is a timer. I think a timer is really important. I've said 15 minutes, but depending on the age group, you'll need to kind of rein this in. We could get in a brainstorming circle where we're brainstorming for too long, and too many ideas to flood the stage, so to speak, or it could be too quick where that blank piece of paper is intimidating. So I think it's important to give them a time frame where they feel like an urgency to come up with as many ideas and they're not really vetting their ideas before they put them out. The point of this, again, is more ideas. And if you are not sure how to add a timer, if you see right here, if you click right here, this is linked. It was linked. I will relink it before we send it out. But we have down at the bottom, I have a quick slide on how to do the timer. It's 5 steps. It's very easy so that you can do this on your own when you're back there. But if you're using this template, it's already here. You can adapt it as you see fit. So here we are in our, oh, here we go. It is linked. It's because I didn't click on my mouse. So here we go. So when I'm talking about brainstorming, there's a few different frameworks you could use, but there's really no wrong way to brainstorm. The idea of this is to get the kids' creative juices flowing. Scamper is a really good one for your primary grades. It is good all the way up into the upper grades too, but is one I found very successful. If that is not something you're familiar with, I've linked a resource for you right here. Sketchstorm is basically brainstorming but in drawing, so they could actually start to draw out their ideas, simple mind mapping, listing. I'm sure you as teachers have a million ideas, wet ink, where they just write as many ideas as they have in 2-3 minutes and try not to let their pencils stop. Things like that. But the point of this, again, is just as many ideas as possible. And what I'd like to point out here on this completely blank piece of paper is don't underestimate the power of giving kids a blank slate. Letting groups of kids come up to your smartboard and write all of their ideas down, you know, put post-it notes and collect them all together. Use the shout it out. Just giving them blank space to brainstorm. They decide how they organize it. You know, I think sometimes just a blank slate, we try to sometimes control and organize, which is great, but sometimes, especially in brainstorming, just giving them a blank space and let the kids decide how to organize their brainstorm, I think can be a powerful tool. So now we've brainstormed, we have tons of ideas, but as we know, we have to narrow in now to just one idea. So I'm not actually going to start this activity, but one way I like to do this is of all the ideas that we've collected and discussed, kind of sort them and organize them. What seems the most rational? What's the longest shot? What's the most interesting? For my little kids, it might just be what seems doable, what seems far-fetched, you know, just letting them kind of sort through the information that they are collecting. So they can start to narrow in on an idea, and not every group might pick the same idea, and that's okay, but this kind of lets them start to prioritize where they want to start.
And Kim, I just want to quickly touch on a note. You notice that Kim's used these shouted out activities quite a bit, and as we've been going through this walkthrough, she's having them on the screen when students are sending in their ideas. But actually really important is you can run a shouted out activity and have something else up on your screen at the time. So what I mean by that is if Kim clicks start here and has her students start to send in questions to, or send in responses to the shouted out activity, she can actually change the notebook page that she's on, or open up a browser tab, or go back to that blank canvas where students might have kind of just whiteboarded their thoughts and ideas. So kind of that differentiation of student experience is also something as you're kind of taking a look at this to keep in mind.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and it's going to rejoin. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and end this one that we just started. So again, narrowing in from this ideate phase, and if you go back to our very first slide of the process, you'll see this is something they might come back to. They might need to come back to the brainstorming stage, and that's okay. That is hard for some of our students as we're first getting started because they want it to be perfect. They want it to work the first time. They want to find the answer, right? Where's the formula? That kind of thinking. Well, this type of activity really builds that growth mindset where it's okay when things don't work, because that's how it is in the real world, right? Things don't always work the first time. So how do you go back? How do you adapt? How do you make changes based on the new information you have? So that leads us to the prototype test. This is where things get messy. This is where you have materials all over your classroom. This is where you have groups of kids going out doing different things, taking videos, borrowing your materials. To be honest, this is where when I did this in my classroom where I wasn't quite sure where my desk ended and theirs started, this is where they're really getting in, but this is where so much of the learning happens. And one thing I like to talk about is that the process is more important than the product. So the very first time we do it, it's important. What materials do you need? Sketch up your ideas, your plans, label it, create a diagram, write step-by-step instructions as you're going and creating this, because realistically, if we're creating real-world problems, we need it to be able to be scaled and shared out with other people. And finally, when they do it, they need to test it. Does it work? Well, what worked? What was a success? What ideas need to be improved? So notice right here on this page, I have them going back to repeat. Now I created this page. I actually used the shape pin right here. So if I click on my pins, so your students themselves could figure out how to organize this, but I like the shape pin because when they roughly draw a shape on the board, it organizes it for them and makes it nice and neat so that then they can type in it and create their own workflow. So that way also everybody's doesn't work the same. and really focusing on this repeat. This would also be a great process to do in SmartAmp, which is part of the Smart Learning Suite. And if you have an active subscription, you do have access to. We are not going to deep dive SmartAmp today, but to log in, you just use your Google logins. The students would use their Google logins, and they could collaboratively all be on one space, sketching ideas, writing things, what worked, what didn't work. This was the part that in our engineering brightness that was done in SmartAmp, and it was really successful. And I will actually link up the engineering brightness workspace over here in the attachments. I did not think to do that earlier. It just came to me. So I'll make sure to add that before we send our follow-up email. So again, this part is really important. You will spend time in this stage. I actually included the exact same slide twice because this is something they're going to have to do a few times. If I was doing this in a classroom, I might have these labeled group 1, group 2, group 3, and as they're working, when they have new information to share, they get to come up to the board, click on it, and add their ideas. So I really encouraged my students to come up to the board, to use the board, to not just do it from their own devices, because I think that one, working in a large space, they can all see it, they can all touch it, they can all interact with it, but it's also really empowering. It's that think tank atmosphere as opposed to this is the teacher's space. It becomes a learning space, a collaboration space, and I think that's really powerful for our students. So again, remembering the process is more important than the product. So maybe at the end they didn't have a light source that worked, but they now have ideas of what does work, what could they impact, and maybe if they had an engineer or somebody on board that could actually do some of the building of their ideas, they could get that to work. Well, then as the teacher, you can use technology at this point to connect them with those professionals and those experts, especially when you're doing it for a real-world purpose. These lights and engineering brightness were actually built and sent to the countries in need. So when we talk about having real-world impact, I think it's very valuable. So after all of this process, Jeremy, before I go on to the next step in the design thinking, was there any questions?
Just a quick one of whether, and just a quick note on SmartAmp. Some folks asked if SmartAmp works with teacher student Office 365 accounts, and SmartAmp does require a G Suite for Education domain in order to be utilized. So I think with that, you're good to move on.
Absolutely. And at the very end, Jeremy's very quickly going to show you SLS Online. This would be something that could be done, and the kids on their, especially with iPads, would be very effective because they can sketch using a stylus and things like that. And each have a copy of this on their student device as well, using SLS Online. So the last step here is to share. And I actually went out to Twitter the other day and asked for a great quote about why it's important for our students to have authentic audiences. You know, we know this, we hear this, and I love this quote. This was actually sent to me by somebody from Charter Schools USA. If students are sharing their work with the world, they want it to be good. If they're just sharing it with you, they want it to be good enough. So I really like this quote because even teachers that have great relationships, our best students, they ask, is this good enough? Am I done? Is this okay? You know, but when they're sharing it with the world, they're their own worst critic. They're like, oh, I can fix this. Oh, I can make this better. And I think that's something we need to make sure that they know there's an audience. So in our engineering brightness example, they actually connected through to some of the other schools that did have technology through video conferencing. They, at one point, some people actually traveled there. I mean, it was an amazing project, but they actually sent the lights. They were actually sharing their designs, their ideas, and it gave them purpose. It wasn't just a school activity, it was a mission, it was a project. And I think that's the difference of just engaging and empowering. I have actually linked, and we are not going to show the video right now, but I have linked right in here this engineering brightness. It kind of shows you real life what the students were up to and how it went through and how they were able to they used SmartAmp, but how they were able to connect and collaborate and have real world impact. And actually engineering brightness is an actual challenge that is going on still. And if you search engineering brightness, I can also link that. It's something you can be a part of as well as helping provide those solutions to these countries. So with that, I open it up for a few more questions of anything, burning questions that might be out there.
While we give folks a moment, if they have any other questions that they want to send in, why don't you pop open for us a browser, and we'll take a look at what we kind of alluded to, Smart Learning Suite Online. So for those folks that are on the call that haven't heard of Smart Learning Suite Online, and again, want to just recap, Kim showed you a lot of things today, really exciting things around Smart Notebook, Smart Lab. She alluded to Smart Amp. All of those are part of Smart's Learning Suite software. So folks that are at schools or have classrooms that are subscribers to Smart Software, you get all of that as part of your subscription. One part that we're actually officially launching later this month, and it's actually in beta right now, so if you go to our website you can learn more information about trialing it, is something called Smart Learning Suite Online. So I'm going to really quickly show you a preview of what this experience will be like for those of you folks that use Notebook and smart content and have student devices, or even as a teacher you might have an iPad that you carry around in your classroom. So what we have here is the beta look at Smart Learning Suite Online. Remember those lab activities that Kim was showing you all around Shout It Out and some of those other activities? You'll actually be able to create those lab activities from a browser with Smart Learning Suite Online when we launch the software officially. But Kim, why don't you go ahead and click on that STEM design thinking lesson that you showed us today on Notebook Desktop. And the online experience of Smart Learning Suite, with this element that we're excited to release, a teacher can actually upload a Smart Notebook file into this system on the browser, right? And then actually deliver this lesson from any device. So you can see here as Kim clicks through this, she can ink. She's got some stylus tools there. She can move and manipulate objects. She can erase objects, and actually launch those things like Shout It Out and whatnot, from her mobile device. So any device, think about launching this. What's really exciting about this, and we won't show this in full-fledged today, but stay tuned. If you join one of our future webinars, we'll make sure that we take you on a tour of this. But you're actually going to notice up top in that Connected Student tab, just like how students were joining the session in Class Lab, students can actually join the sessions with Smart Learning Suite Online. And what gets handed out to them that time in Smart Learning Suite Online is not just the lab activity, but actually the content and the lab activities. So that while they're in that session, while that live session is running, students can actually look at the notebook content as well as participate in the activities. So something that if you haven't heard yet or haven't played with yet, visit Smart's website, take a look. You can try the beta version right now. Go ahead and take a look, and let us know if you have any questions in the future about that. We're excited to hear all of your folks' opinions on the online components of Smart Learning Suite that we're launching this month. So very excited about it. The other quick comment, because I know we're having some questions that we can run through, if you haven't seen the registration page for future educator-to-educator webinars, no problem. Kim's going to go ahead and show that on the screen. We have upcoming webinars. Our next one will be later this month, 2 weeks from today, and it will actually be led by a classroom teacher. So Kim is the best of the best at Smart, one of our experts on the efficacy and implementation team, former classroom educator, but we're also going to have later this month on kind of this September STEM theme, an educator walk through how they kind of planned and delivered and kind of the thought process on their classroom application of STEM lessons in driving student engagement. So we'd love to have you join, and you can see some of the topics for the future next month. Student literacy and literacy-focused lessons will be the topic. So excited to have you, register for those if you haven't yet. Kim, let's fly through some questions. We had one question missed the first part of the webinar. Will it be posted? Well, actually, yes, we will post these, and then we'll send out a post-webinar communication in the next few days that will allow you to have access to the content, as Kim mentioned, as well as the recording of the content, and we'll post it up on a part of Smart's training website, in which then you can send it to your peers, to your friends, to other folks who couldn't make it today, but you want to share this content with maybe some other teachers at your school or teachers down the hallway. Some other folks just want to know how to initiate connections for students outside of the classroom for presentation of their products, so projects. So kind of that teacher-to-teacher networking. Kim, do you want to kind of speak through some of the ways in which we help facilitate that?
Absolutely. First of all, we have there's a great group of our C community, smart exemplary educators that are connected and that share ideas. I personally have found one of my favorite ways to connect with people is through Twitter. Reaching out, finding connections. If you reach out to Smart, if you reach out to us and you're looking to do something, let us know, and we can see if we can help partner you with some classrooms. Like we said, we do have some teachers that we know are very active and really enjoy doing these types of projects. But I have found great success. Hashtag STEM, hashtag design thinking. We also have a hashtag Smart Champion. If you're looking on connecting to some other educators that are working on things like this. So I really encourage you to, lean on that personal learning network. And if you aren't involved in that yet, I will tell you as an educator, it really helps broadens my horizons beyond my district and where I was working, and really opened it up to a whole bunch of great new ideas and connections. And that's one thing that's so amazing about technology and that we were able to do with our kids is we connected them. And when we connect as teachers, we are only improving ourselves. So I think that's really important.
I think those are great points. And speaking of Twitter, if you don't follow Smart Technologies on Twitter, please do. We'll actually be hosting some Twitter chats or a Twitter chat next week on this topic around STEM and the classroom and whatnot, and wanting to continue the conversation with folks like yourselves beyond just the webinar today. So thanks for mentioning that, Kim. Looks like we've got a couple other questions that have filtered in. Let me just take a look. We have some questions around, tailoring this content and to specific classrooms. I think that we'd love to continue that conversation with you, Kim, if your Twitter handle's up there, if you want to actually leave it up there, if there's anything you'd like to speak to on how you customize this or apply this, to classrooms with scaffolding and whatnot.
Absolutely. The one thing I would say is that if you ask your students to make the connection, so if I'm a math teacher and we're working with algebraic equations and working with the unknown, well, how does this apply? So when we're gathering that information, we're really focusing on writing those equations, really focusing and asking them to demonstrate that math concept and their knowledge of it while they're working through this. So I think it doesn't have to be as something completely separate. You don't need to put your curriculum on hold in order to do a design thinking STEM project. You want to weave this and integrate it in, because as we all know as teachers, the one thing we do not have enough of is time, and money. But I think that that's a really important thing, to weave this into what you actually need to cover and hold them accountable for it. Show me that you understand this in the process. But I'd be happy to continue that conversation on Twitter.
Absolutely, and I think as we wrap up, we're glad to hear suggestions, for webinar topics in the future that you all would like to have us cover beyond what we covered today. And Kim, just one quick update for everybody. Our Twitter handle is at @smart_tech, so not the nologies at the end.
So sorry.
No problem. I just wanted to make sure we let everybody know so they could continue that conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us today. As we said at the start, we're kicking off this webinar series, so we look forward to seeing you on more Thursdays later this fall and into the winter, and continuing the conversations at smarttech.com, and hearing just ways in which we can help support the conversation around the tremendous instruction that takes place in your classrooms, and leveraging technology to inspire greatness with your students and the great work that you all do every day. Looks like Kim just put up a quote for us at the end there, and I'll pass it back over to Kim to close this up today. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining.
Absolutely. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we were able to spark some new ideas. Look for a follow-up email, like we said. Again, all the resources are linked here, including that blank template, and some other ideas, some other things I mentioned I will add. And so that'll be coming your way. But I just wanted to bring a circle back to this quote, really enabling the exploration with our students, and getting away from our teacher-centered and back to really setting up our classroom for what innovators do. So I really thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in future webinars.